Adult love and kindness is the most valuable resource in the wound. And it is unfortunately produced in very low and inconsistent quantities within the United States and many of our modern cultures. We lack the competency to deal with the feminine terrain within the psyche, basing our culture on an underlying foundation of chauvinism in which the masculine, the yang, energy, behaviors, functions, skills, attributes are perversely elevated, and the feminine is severely undervalued and sells at a significant discount in the social markets, which leads to reduced R&D, reduced development and exhibition of these low-ranked but priceless skills in this terrain. And so the number one thing that you need is adult love that has transcended chauvinism. And this means someone loving you. This can be yourself. This can be a spirit guide. This can be the larger body of the planet. This can be a group. This can be a therapist, a healer, a lover, a friend. You need someone who loves you enough to take the time that it takes to care, who cares enough to take the time it takes to see, and who sees enough to understand, and who understands enough to empathize, and who empathizes enough to attune to an optimum and graceful path for your acceleration in your survival, your shelter, your basic money, your food, etc., your medicine, your survival, your security, your reserves and access to resources, your love and belonging. You know that you belong in a couple of different ways. You belong when your pain is as valuable as any other member of your group or in your relationship. It's not an either-or dynamic. Your pain is not more valuable, it's not less valuable. You belong when your pain is as valuable as anyone else's. And the realization of that truth comes in the behavior when everyone where you belong acts as if your pain is as important to them as their pain, that your fear of pain is as important to them as their fear of pain. You know that you belong. And when your friends or family behave in a way that makes it evident that avoiding their fears is more important than helping you with yours, that reducing their pain, even at your expense, is more important than your pain, that their expediency, that their reduction in energy expenditure is more important to them even if it costs you enormously. If you've got an important letter, for example, and you're overseas, and you call someone, could you please run over, you're 5 minutes away from my house, could you please check my mailbox and get that letter? It would mean everything to me, and they don't get around to it. The message is you do not belong, because it would take you maybe $3,000 in airfare and back and forth and this and that to go and do that. And you may do that rather than keep begging But what they're saying is their 5 minutes is more valuable to them than your $3,000 because you do not matter, because you do not belong. They may say we're friends in a cult that waters down that word to mean almost nothing. But you belong when you are with an individual where your need is valued as high as their need. It is a human need to feel love and belonging, which means it's a human need to understand the paradigm of love and belonging. So one is to have one's impact treated as equal, which includes opportunity. In a functioning family that loves itself, if one daughter has a great opportunity, whether it's work or travel, the whole family gets behind her at that moment where if they all work together, her life transcends and changes. And if they all sabotage or don't care, no one gets out of the crab pen. They just keep each other in the trap. And it's not love. It's not belonging. It may be fear of loneliness. It may be hostility and cruelty. It may be familiarity. Every family is familiar. But it can be familiarly cruel and brutal and idiotic. So you have love and belonging when someone loves you in this process and attunes enough to succeed at realizing your human needs. That's love. Has nothing to do with sex. You can be deeply, profoundly loved without any physical contact. You can be deeply and profoundly loved with warm sensuality, and you can be deeply and profoundly loved with a very deep and passionate sexuality. And you can be cruelly abused, shamed and traumatized with the person who hugs you, the person who passionately has sex with you, whatever it is. There's nothing to do with, and this is why I say that adult love is the most rare thing that our cult produces. There are many, a vast majority of Americans who do not feel love or belonging a large percentage of their lives. Some never experience. Some, from cradle to grave, are never loved once because we do not produce the competency of teaching or modeling or talking about adult love. And left to the kind of cult memes, we do as much abuse in the name of love as we do anything else. So love and kindness is what you need. It takes lots of love, lots of kindness. You want the person who is intelligent enough to know that it is an honor to be serving the wound, who knows that it's not your wound, who knows it's not your fault, who knows that if any fault is to be found, it is in the algorithm of stupidity that is our cult, who understands that every cult in human history, there have been an estimated 10,000 belief systems, 10,000 algorithms for relating to reality. And every single cult in human history believes that it is right, believes that it is the way to do things, believes it is the best way. What are the odds that all 10,000 of them were the best way to do things? What are the odds that our cult is better than all the others? It's about 1 in 10,000. So you need kindness from someone who wants to be there. Now, this is very difficult to find in a shame-based capitalist system because almost everyone is afraid. Because in a capitalist system, we understand that human beings are not as valuable as the money they make. If you look at the equation of millions of American homeless, including 1 in 50 children running away from home, 1 in 50 children in America are so severely abused that they think to themselves, I'll enjoy my life more if I give up free rent and free food and familiarity and go off into the sociopathic mess that is our cult. You have to be pretty desperate, and 1 in 50 American children is that desperate that they'd rather do anything but continue with the primary people that raised them. And so there's a lot of pain there. And if you look at our millions of homeless, why aren't their human needs fulfilled? Why are they uncertain of survival? Certainly not secure. Why are they carrying the cult's shame? It comes down to one thing. They don't have enough money to buy what in my county is an average price of $1 million home. So they don't have the $1 million, and so they're treated like shit. If they had the $1 million, they'd have every realtor in the county treating them like a human being. But they are no less or no more a human being, whether they have the $1 million or have $300 on the street. The difference is that in a cult that values money more than the human beings who make money, and certainly more than humanity in its essence, these people are shamed and humiliated, persecuted with tax money, rather than helped, because they don't have money, not because they're not a human being. Your money in a capitalist cult is more valuable than who you are. And this is a horrific trauma and grief to encounter because it is a lie. The whole story of the golden goose was to correct this narrative. The golden egg is not close to as valuable as the goose that lays the golden egg. Because even if you are obsessed with gold, then you should be even more obsessed with the goose that lays an endless amount of gold. You are a human being capable of laying an endless amount of gold. When you are treated like shit, while at the same time more gold is asked of you, it doesn't work. It's like the gardener telling the plant, you grow. I want to see some growth, and then I'll give you some water. No gardener worth their salts behaves like such a moron. But we do this to our children all the time. You be the grown-up. You behave more maturely than your parents, and then maybe we'll give you a few crumbs. So you need kindness. You want people there because they want to be there. This is incredibly vulnerable terrain. And my discovery was I couldn't find such people reliably. Now, there's a couple of different substitutes and things. The dimensionality of reality is far more vast than the 3 or 4 dimensions that we engage with in our limited sensory connection. physics, mathematics, geometry, and cultures throughout human history have acknowledged the world of other. The world of other, by definition, is vastly bigger than our world. If you think of a sphere and think of it being sliced in 4 dimensions, these are just planes. Most of reality exists in the planes that are not included in the 4 slices. There's a tremendous amount of reality that is outside normal cult perception. And the good thing is that some of those frequencies, some of those dimensions, some of those consciousness know how and want to love you better than anyone on this planet. So you may connect with that in meditation. You may connect with that in nature. You may connect with that through a crystal or a healing energy or a visualization or great literature. However you may do a runner's high and get into that. The key is to break through out of the cult programming, to let in the healing and the light. And by light, I mean the full spectrum of energy, dark and light, the rainbow of not only dual energy, but of non-dual energy, that synergy that is bigger than the conscious mind can fully grasp, bigger than the cult consciousness can let in. But to let some of that in. Now, you may also wish to make this connection more, to open it up a little bit more. And so you have spa, you have hot tubs, hot springs, you have scents, you have flowers, you have gardens, you have massage, you have Reiki and any of the full spectrums of different energies. You have humming, you have singing, you have music, you have light, you have ambiance, you have delicious organic food. You have a whole different ways to calm and center a little bit that you may or may not have access to. But to the extent that you do, these are good vehicles. Now, one of the deepest wounds for me personally was the American experience of someone saying, "Hey, how are you?" And I would say, absolutely devastated. It's like I'm just holding on for dear life. And a majority of times, they would change the subject, walk away awkwardly, pretend like I'd said nothing. One customer said great and walked away. And so this cult is a lie in these dimensions. It's not asking to see who you are. And of course, it's not that I'm unfamiliar with the setup of this question, which is, one of our many crazinesses. It's just that the isolation and the willingness to hide the wound is part of the way the wound perpetuates. And I didn't want to play along. And so I would answer the question in a way that felt authentic and leave the cult, leave the many faces of betrayal, ignorance, confusion in the circle around us to deal with that inadequacy. Because that needs to change to be a human being, to move from the reptilian brain through the limbic brain to the empathic and rational centers of the brain. That is not rational or empathic. We need, as a cult, to develop an effective response to clear transmission of trauma and abuse. And we don't have that. But we haven't even grasped or had the conversation about why don't we have that. And we're not going to have that conversation until there's a lot of discomfort. Because in an unconscious shadow-averse abuse cult, nothing changes until the status quo becomes more painful than the unknown. Then people look for a solution, like sanity, like traumatic literacy. But until that point, everyone's in denial of the issue, and that hurts everyone, day after day after day. And so, but regardless, when someone responds to this information as if it's meaningless, the message is you do not matter. Because if they had any decency or humanity, they'd give you a hug. They'd ask how they could help. They would recommend a trauma book. They would see what you need and behave like a human being that acknowledged that you shouldn't be carrying the weight of the cult's stupidity on your own. That's a human being for you. We get reptiles. And it is tremendously painful to understand just how many reptiles there are in a cult that is more self-absorbed, because the person in that situation who's listening says, "Oh my God, I don't know how to handle this." Me, all about me. I don't want to look bad, all about me. I don't want to spend any energy, all about me. So let me get rid of this person as quickly as possible so that I feel comfortable again, all about me. When a reptile encounters large amounts of pain, their goal is to avoid it without being affected in any way and leave other people to deal with the issue. And so what you want is an adult. The adult is the first stage of development, because you have the child love, I need you. Every child needs their parents, and that is the child's love. I need you. Great. You've mastered child love. I want you. I want to fuck you. I want to touch you. I want to be with you like this and this and this. Adolescent love is great. You've mastered the love of an adolescent. I want you. I want to be free. I want to be myself. Great. You've mastered the self-love of the young adult. I'm being my own person. Screw everyone else. Great. You're a young adult, internally, regardless of your biological age. The adult is the first stage of development that loves the inner child enough to see them, that sees them enough to understand them, that understands them enough to empathize and to attune to that inner child and lift some of the tremendous weight and abuse that was given to us. And the adult is the first person capable of looking out and caring about the other. And so the adult loves the inner adolescent, and the adult loves the young adult. And the adult loves and accepts the adult. And only at that point is the spontaneous, intuitive impulse to reach outward to help another. When I know how to love, when I've developed adulthood, the ability to understand, see, and love the parts of me and advocate for my own needs, survival, security, love and belonging, etc., then I've become an adult. And then I can advocate for your needs. So when you're in regressed trauma, an adult responds. It's the nature of an adult to love, and to love as an adult, which is to facilitate the realization of the other person's human needs to a point of independence, so that then two adults can love each other. That's how the virus of love spreads. when one person goes through the disciplined process to create enough successful attunement that the other person feels in the realization of their human needs safety, gratitude, pleasure, happiness, joy, a sense of peace, and then they connect those feelings with the person who produced those feelings, and they synergize and they become love. And this is how the virus of adult love spreads. One adult loves another human being, healing trauma, healing regression, etc., climbing the stages of human needs, and participates for the joy of healing, the joy of participating, until the other person catches the disease, or the ease in this case, the ease of love. It's the synergy. So you want to look for kindness, you want to look for adult love. Now, I was fortunate. I went overseas, and I spent time in Manila, and I spent time in Phuket, Thailand. And I could not find empathy in my culture. I couldn't find someone who would cry the tears that I didn't know how to cry. I couldn't find someone who could model grief or model adulthood or empathy, etc. I was a lost and terrified little boy being given all of the problems that the grown-ups were too scared to deal with themselves. And so I wanted to find people that cared. And that's easier to find in warmer tropical cultures because there's less survival-based trauma. You see, in a winter culture like our own, where I grew up in upstate New York, and there's 3 feet of snow sometimes. Now, if you don't prepare for that time when you have 3 feet of snow, you die. And what this teaches you, after enough people die, a traumatic legacy, is you get off your butt when you're sunbathing in July and you go out and chop wood. And you build something and you store wood and you keep it dry, and you do this not because you want to. Nobody wants to stop swimming in July and go and chop wood. But you do it so you'll live through the snowdrift. So you'll live through the winter. You prepare food. So there's a discipline of dissociating from the moment in order to survive in cold and harsh environments. And Western culture is more sociopathic, more disconnected from the feminine, because the feminine is about feeling and spontaneity. If you were totally in the feminine, in a harsh climate, you'd just burst into tears and die when the winter came. But in warm temperate climates like Thailand, it's never too cold. So it's much more in tune with feelings. It's much more in tune with empathy. It's much more honoring of feminine energy. And that is where the wound is. Psychological trauma, sexual abuse, etc., is in the domain of the feminine psyche. And so warm, temperate, older cultures, the U.S. is 400 years old, Thailand is 4,000 years old. Older cultures that are in more tropical environments know how to love the wounded feminine self. And I think it's harder for men because men get shamed a lot more for their femininity. And so if you have a wound, a deep wound in your femininity, your therapist sexually abusing you under the influence of psychedelics, it doesn't get more vulnerable and feminine than that. And the cult is completely clueless about how to help a young man prepare for that wound, respond to that wound, or heal that wound. A clueless cult results in tremendous amounts of pain. The Thai actually do understand. It was wonderful. There was an older woman who wept by the pain she saw in my face that I couldn't cry. She wept. She knew how to do what no U.S. trained therapist knew how to do. She knew how to do what none of my friends knew how to do. She knew how to do what my abuser couldn't do. She wept. And in doing so, she told me that I belonged. In adjusting her diet, she told me that my pain as a stranger was more important to her than doing house chores, etc. She made time. And this is, another Thai woman. She would massage my head. And it might just be for 10 minutes. But she wasn't a masseuse. And we weren't dating. And I'd play with her dog in this little mud hut. It's and I felt more luxurious than I feel in a palace anywhere in the world, because she felt something and she cared. Something that my cult could not do, because we are emotionally illiterate from cradle to grave, with just little bleeps and small deviations from that illiteracy that we're so excited about. Like, oh, aren't I sophisticated? I actually know how to respond to the question, how are you feeling? And I can say a few things. We're at 5% literacy compared to the domains that other cults in human history have explored and developed into exquisite levels of artistry. And so when you get stabbed deep in a terrain verging on unconsciousness and brutality, it's very difficult to heal such a wound. The feminine is also more core to the psyche. The feminine is what gives birth to the masculine. So seek love and kindness within yourself, within the ethers, within the world, to the degree that you can. And understand that in this world, it is statistically 98%, or who knows what the exact percentage, but statistically, it is highly likely that particularly in our cult, you will meet energy that is clueless attempts to love and befriend and try to make things better, that makes things worse, and then that gets mad at you when you try and coach them how to actually make it better. And then they abandon you because it's too much work to actually learn how to be relationally competent in this terrain. And the message will come again and again, you're not worth it, you're not worth it, you're not worth it. That is a lie. It's actually rather sad, because this form of relational incompetency affects all human relationships, which deeply affect our well-being at all levels. And so when these people walk away pretending that you're too much trouble, they're walking away from one of the most valuable opportunities our cult presents to learn how to love themselves, their partners, their children, and others in a way that our cult desperately needs and that is innately connected to their survival. That's the gift that you bring, is the opportunity to learn to love you when it really matters. This love and kindness is was very difficult for me to locate in a form that I could accept and reject it and receive it, that didn't feel humiliating and scary in its unreliability and lack of trustworthiness, etc. And it can be in different places, etc. I found healing just laying my body in shallow waves in the island of Palawan in the Philippines. There's up on the, I think it's the western coast, halfway up, there are these little bamboo huts, and one can just lay there in 8 inches to a foot of water and just let the waves go over and over in the kind of cloudy, warm humidity of, a tropical culture where there's tenderness and responsiveness and silence. And one can breathe into the grief, into the pain that is not welcome in a chauvinistic, modern American cult. And so that's, these are little fumbling attempts to open up to something significantly better. I also taught several masseuses. One I noticed had profound energy healing capacities that she was unconscious of. So I taught her how to ground. I taught her how to visualize and work with chakra energies. She would just touch my feet and 50% of my pain would go away. And who knew? She didn't know. I didn't know until she touched me. She was quite an ornery bitch in many ways. Stubborn, scarred, defensive, etc. It was certainly not didn't have any overtones of romance or anything like that. But she was the one. She was the one. That persona was a front. And behind that was a grace that transported me. So I cultivated that relationship to where we would spend 2 to 5 hours a day together in that healing state, so that the pain would go down to a level that I did not need to anesthetize it. And this is the next point in this. There will be a gap, most likely, where you're going to do everything you possibly know how to love yourself as an adult without having great role models, to find healers to love you, etc. You're going to do everything you possibly can, and it may take you all of the way, in which case you've got much more grace than I did. But there will likely be a point where the pain is bigger than your response and bigger than you can bear. And this is the terrain of compulsion and addiction. So you can do a lot of things. You can drive really fast. You can rush around. You can flood yourself with work. You can flood yourself with sex. You can flood yourself with sugar or food or media, whatever it is. You can repetitively divert yourself from a massive amounts of pain. But this will not heal you, and you will probably pay a price. So in this stage of kind of healing and relating, what I'd encourage you to do is to pick a few relatively benign addictions. Could be pornography, it could be food, could be sugar, could be pick something that is not going to have lasting impact. Heroin is not, doesn't have great odds. Gaining 15 pounds and then 5 years later, as the traumatic process has worked its way through, giving up those 15 pounds, there's a price for any addiction. But you can also, compulsively read maybe, or compulsively do exercise or something. Compulsion is a narrow band, repetitive, intense sensation behavior. It gives you some peace from the mind-numbing intensity of overwhelming pain you don't know how to deal with. That's the gift of a repetitive, compulsive behavior of some kind. And I chose stuffing myself with the best food I could find until the ache in my belly would go down. And then I also chose making videos like this is actually an addiction. And I've always tried to pick addiction. I did therapeutic addiction because therapy didn't really heal trauma. That was the joke that I learned after $140,000 of various forms of therapy. Then I learned that all of those therapies don't address trauma because trauma is somatic, biological, and chatting about stuff never touches that. It's like trying to melt steel with 300-degree heat. You can pour 300-degree heat on a steel plate for 1,000 years, and it will never liquefy. Or you can put 4,000-degree heat for 5 minutes, and you can change the steel. Trauma and traumatic templates are some of the hottest temperature dynamics in the psyche, which means some therapist taking notes for 50 minutes who's uncomfortable with intense feelings, being a good American, is not going to cut it. You're going to take maybe 3 or 4 people weeping, lamenting. Well, that's very unsophisticated, meaning our idea of sophistication is to interrupt an innate biological grief system that has worked for thousands of cults in human history for thousands of years, and call the suppression and numbing of those feelings into a stasis of dissociated traumatic energy, and we call that progress. We're so dumb we don't even know we're dumb. And that's something to laugh or weep about if you can pull it off. It's not personal. It's not your fault. It's not your parents' fault either. Dumb, emotionally illiterate cultures pass on their stupidity to one generation after the next and punish the hell out of the deviants who have the audacity to challenge the status quo. Because highly traumatized cults are terrified of the unknown, because all trauma enters from the unknown. If it's known, you escape. Trauma enters from the unknown in a helpless mass that's too big to deal with. As a result, traumatized cults with traumatic histories are terrified of the unknown. Well, most of the unknown cannot be tracked or managed. It is unknown. So our response to this is an illusionary form of safety known as cult dynamics. And these cult dynamics create repetitive memes of things that are known and predictable. And so, for example, in the United States, you can pretty much say, "How are you? I am fine." Means absolutely nothing, but that's pretty predictable. So how do you respond? Well, you say, "I'm fine." Well, what if I'm not fine? Well, so just do this, and just do this, and smile like this, and talk about this, and say that's awesome. Now, you don't need to feel awe or even connect this. That's just the in thing to do. And so it's all about copying the majority dynamic. Why? Why are we so obsessed with the mediocrity that is our normalcy? Why? Because it protects us from the unknown. Because if everyone's doing that and no one's dead yet, then let's all do that, and we'll just stay in these little tight loops of mediocre memes and avoid. What's the worst thing in America? Weird. Weird is good if you have any intelligence and you can discern between the divergence that is at the highest bleeding edge of change and innovation and the divergence that is lagging behind the majority. You need to have a certain amount of discernment. But by definition, the cutting edge of any cult is held by a very small minority of people. And first the cult tries to kill them off and get them to be normal. If they can't, they give up. And then these anomalous individuals, these part of the biological complexity of an ecology that produced the human species, gives rise to innovation and change. that blesses the majority that tried so hard to kill them off. It's one of the reasons why you can measure the intelligence of a cult by the sophistication and honor with which it relates to its minorities. A cult that loves itself treats its minorities really well. A cult that hates itself and is fear-based does its best to kill off, shame, and antagonize its minorities with sheer brute force. It's easy to do. We're the majority, you're the minority, we can bully you. Well, we don't get many highly innovative, transformative people with that system because we attack anomalies, because we're afraid of the unknown, because we're traumatized in a trauma-illiterate cult. And the greatest terror in every human being in an abuse cult is finding themselves alone, shamed, and hurt in a new traumatic wound that everyone abandons and punishes them for. Because that's what happens in abuse cults. So it's terrifying and lonely. How to avoid it? So this is you're going to need, in most likelihood, an addiction. So I chose therapy as one of my addictions. I would do therapy with 3 different practitioners. 2 hours on Monday, 2 hours on Wednesday, 2 hours on Friday. And not only is that a tax given to the people our cult hurts the most, but then the government wants to tax you on the money you pay to heal yourself from the cult's abuse. Meaning if my government had done its job and not delivered a grandfather with PTSD from World War II and just dumped him on a 6-year-old father, my father might have grown up emotionally rather than staying a traumatized, regressed 6-year-old feeling powerless and wanting revenge. Revenge on who? Cowards don't take revenge on competent adults. They take revenge on their children. So my government gives a grandfather with PTSD back to a family after the war and shames and covers up the literature about PTSD to save money. So my father grows up without an adult, with a reptile who terrifies the shit out of him. An addict and a reptile. He doesn't know how to be an adult, so he abuses all of his children. So I don't know how to be an adult, because that's not how adults behave. You need some model. And see, no grown-up had the decency to step in and stop the abuse, which means there are no adults around. Because if the people you're calling grown-up cannot see obvious signs of traumatic abuse, or if they see them, don't intervene on the child's behalf, they're not adults. They're shame-based, frightened children afraid of getting punished by going head-to-head with a tyrannical abuser. Well, that's nothing to learn from for a child. So you have this dynamic, where do you find an adult? But having, I guess, negated its responsibility as a country and a culture and a military to return a safe, competent human being outside of the reptilian brain to a family, the government turns around and when third generation is doing healing work, wants to tax me 50% of every dollar I spend healing. So you're taxed by being given the stupidity and cruelty of your cult, which makes it harder for you to earn an income. And then you have to take time off work to go to therapy, which makes it harder to make money for income. And then you have to pay a $600 bill every week to people who may or may not know what they're doing. And then your cult comes along and says, oh, wait, that's not an ordinary necessary business expense. We'd like to take we'd like to charge you $300 a week for having the audacity to fix the wound we gave to your grandfather, didn't repair, and your father didn't protect you from, and then have shoved you out into the cult to just carry on abusing people if you can gain enough power and clout to get away with it, because that's what it takes. Trump is in the perfect position because he can take all the cruelty given to him by his father, and we protect the men at the top in our cult. The president doesn't even have to answer for crimes while he's president. So it's a wonderful position for any abuser. If they can just be president, then they can abuse the entire country with immunity. So what is going to be your addiction? Is it going to be therapy? Is it going to be masturbation? Is it going to be meditation? Something. Is it going to be running? Pick an addiction that ideally takes you in the direction you want to go. So I put studying, making videos, so studying 1,000 hours of traumatic literature and stuff, making videos, sleep deprivation and sleep rotation, creating continuous jet lag by changing when I went to sleep by 6 or more hours every night. So I might go to bed at 6 p.m. one night, and then get up at 5 a.m. and then go to sleep at 4 a.m. the next night, and then wake up at 2 p.m. or switching sleep back and forth created this dissociative buzz that made the pain manageable. It kind of created this peaceful noise where I kind of feel like I'm in a dream. But as a sensitive with a sensitive body, I've never been drunk, and I didn't want to drink, myself into this stupor. And also, changing your sleep pattern is easier on the liver than it is, to drink yourself in a stupor for a couple of years, which is another coping mechanism. As closing of this video, I want to just say that every feeling that you have has an intelligent cause. That the people who shame and blame you, including yourself, including the internalized abusers given to you by your cult, for having this feeling or this impulse, etc., simply reveal the level of psychological ignorance that pervades our cult and the level of narcissistic cruelty that doesn't call ignorance ignorance. Because it's one thing to be beaten up, slapped up and down the face and whacked with whips and all of that, and say we're sociopathic, narcissistic assholes who don't know what the fuck we're doing, and we're busily giving all of our pain to you, and we don't know how to fix it, and we know it's going to backfire, and we know it's going to cause tremendous cost to the economy and the health and all that, and we're just doing it anyway because we're dumb. You can say, yeah, that seems pretty dumb. At least we know we're dealing with reality here. But when you have cowards that are in the majority position, they tell you you need to be more mature, meaning you should be beaten up, etc., and thank them. Or you should take, terrifying, timeless states of horror and reduce it to a 10-second soundbite so that they can pretend that they really cared about what you were feeling, but can go on with their life as if you didn't matter. Could you please do this and this and this? And then aren't we generous and aren't we great friends? We want to perpetuate the mythology that our shame-based ignorance is somehow a magnanimous gift. It's much better to acknowledge, no, how you're behaving is pretty much in line with sociopathic cruelty, high levels of traumatic ignorance. You obviously don't know a thing, and not surprising, you were born in America as part of a Western materialistic abuse cult that's committed to avoiding its shadow. So good on you for being normal, but let's not call it this this type of stuff is going to happen. And so you want a drug, you want a pain number, take your pick, that ideally will not leave effects lasting more than 5 years, that you can reverse when you want to. You know, opioid addiction is kind of hard. When you're in high levels of pain, and you get hooked on something like that, it's very difficult to get off because you've got no support, because you've got the same grief, helplessness, and rage waiting for you at an overwhelming level when you get off the addiction. And you've got the same sociopathic idiots around you that don't know how to hold that level of grief. And that's not your fault. That's not your fault. So seek love and kindness. It is priceless and it is rare. Value it highly and prioritize that as an act of self-love if you can. I was fortunate enough to have some savings when all this hit. And so I spent any amount of money to be able to, and when I was in the Philippines, a great massage cost me $10 an hour. And it was already 3 times better than any massage I can get, in the US. Then came, so I'm getting 3 times for less than a tenth. So 3 times, so this is huge. This allows something like, several hundred hours of consecutive massage. But then when she did healing work, etc., so I prioritized that, and I made an alliance with that shop where I gave her double. So so now I was paying $20, but her healing work was better than any healing work that I could find anywhere in the world. And she just lucked into it. I mean, I worked with enough energy healers that when she touched my feet and there's a huge reduction, it's like, you're doing that better than anyone I know who's charging hundreds of dollars an hour. So so prioritize these wonderful opportunities if you find them. There's a lot riding on this. The culture's evolution, your freedom from your reptilian brain, your ability to be restored to a human being is priceless. Your ability to speak about the journey is tremendously valuable. And you are being given the heaviest weight our cult has to offer. To teach the cult at a certain level how to do what it can't do. You're a leader if you survive this, because you know things that almost no one in this cult knows. And so my prayer is for your success. My prayer is that in the most vulnerable and darkest hour, you understand that the smart money has its bet on you, understands how priceless you can be as an active agent in change, and how lucky, too stupid to realize it, certainly. That's the trouble with idiots. But how lucky this cult is to have a few survivors of this dynamic come through with their humanity intact. So I'm rooting for you. Blessings, blessings on your journey.